All right. Hi, guys. So Candy asked me if I would fill in for her because she's not feeling so well today. So if you think about it, pray for her. So last time we started talking about Daniel, and we started talking about Daniel chapters 1 through 7. We met Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We talked about the different languages that the book of Daniel is written in. Chapter 1 is in Hebrew, chapter 2 is in Aramaic, and chapter 8 through 12 is in Hebrew again. We talked about the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar's issues with humbling themselves that resulted in either living like an animal or being killed and losing your kingdom. We talked about the lion's den. And we talked about the first chapter of Daniel's prophecy section about his dream that paralleled the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 7. Or, well, the dream was in chapter 2 that Nebuchadnezzar had, and Daniel had his dream in chapter 7. Sorry, guys. Okay, so then we talked about how humanity was given dominion over the world to rule over its beasts, but when the kingdoms of humanity decided to rebel against God and they wouldn't humble themselves, we see multiple times in the book of Daniel that they themselves become like beasts. And that kind of theme comes up a few times, and we're going to talk about that more later on. So, after completing chapters 1 through 7, we can start to look back and see the whole big picture of how the book of Daniel is put together. So chapters 1, 3, and 6 are stories of God's faithfulness despite persecution. And those are when we first meet Daniel and he's being taken from Israel, the only place he's ever known, to Babylon in exile. Chapter 3, the fiery furnace. Chapter 6 is the lion's den. And then in chapter 4 and 5, we see that those who follow God suffered because humanity was made in the image of God and rebelled and becomes arrogant, resulting in them becoming more beast-like. And then in chapters 2 and 7, we learn about patience for the future and hope for God to take action and vindicate those who have suffered. The question is, when and how long would it take for God's people to have to wait before they were able to see God move like that and change things so that they would be justified? So this leads us into chapters 8 through 12, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And chapter 8 picks up with the second vision that Daniel has. He sees a ram with 2 horns, which represents the Medes, and he sees a goat that represents the Greeks. Now, the goat had 1 horn that was coming out of the middle, and it was a giant one. And before the goat came around, the ram, who had 2 normal horns, he had one that was a little bit longer, but eventually they grow out to be about the same size. And the ram was unmatched. He could go up against any sort of creature and he could win. And he had power and he had strength and nobody could beat him. Until this goat comes around, representing the Greeks. And with that 1 long horn, the goat overpowers the ram. And it becomes it's no contest. The goat just totally beats him. And it's widely believed that the 1 long horn is the same 1 long horn that we see represented in chapter 7. And many people believe that that was a depiction of Alexander the Great. Because in Daniel's vision, we see this goat, and he's got all this power, and he's got this great ability to beat pretty much anyone, including the super strong ram that was there before. And he ends up having, in the midst of all his glory and everything, this giant horn, it breaks off. And it and four smaller horns come up, and that's why we were pretty sure that it represents the Alexander the Great, because when Alexander the Great was in power, in the midst of his strength, he all of a sudden lost power, and his kingdom fell to four different generals, one from basically every direction of the Greeks' kingdom at the time. So they had one in the north, one in the south, and one in the east, and one in the west. And so, of those four horns, they say they depict like the four winds, so the four different directions. And out of those four, one starts coming up. And it begins, as the Bible says, it started off small and it grows in power. And it came from the south and it rises to the east. And it takes over what the Bible calls the beautiful land, which later on we find out that means Israel and Jerusalem. And it grew until it reached the heavens, and it threw down some of them, and it trampled on them, like the heavens, the stars. It was set up to be as great as a prince of the host, and it was because of rebellion, the host of the saints and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. And this goat with the four horns, it becomes incredibly arrogant, and it starts saying like it's amazing, and it attacks Jerusalem. It exalts itself above God, and eventually, because it was exalting itself above God, it was destroyed by God. Now, my Bible says, like my study Bible, in the study helps, it was saying that it's kind of understood there was this Greek ruler, which I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, it's really funky, so I'm just going to say there was this Greek ruler that they're pretty sure that this one little horn that started off small and gets bigger and more prominent and then starts speaking out against God and doing all these horrible things, they're pretty sure that that's him. And the reason why is because that particular ruler, he came to Jerusalem, he did take over, and he put up an image of Zeus, and on the altar of God, he sacrificed a pig in honor of Zeus, which, if you know anything about the Jewish tradition, like, that's horrible. I mean, really, really bad, and that's like a slap in the face. So, we don't know for sure if that's who it was, but it's widely believed that that's the particular ruler that this one small horn grows into being. So, during the vision, Daniel is wondering what it is that he's seeing, and he sees Gabriel, the angel, and Gabriel explains that this is a vision of things that would happen in what he called your distant future. And he explains that the ram are the Medes, and he explains that the goat is the Greeks. Now, I think it's super cool because I was thinking about this today. So, in the past, when we were reading about Daniel, everyone kind of knew that Daniel was able to explain dreams and everything. But as I said last time, Daniel always gave credit to God. He always was like, God is the one who told me what this was, and God is the one who told me what this means, so you shouldn't be giving me credit. And I just think it's super awesome that in every one of Daniel's visions and dreams, God always told him in the midst of the vision and in the dream what it meant. And I've always been just blown away by that. Because when thinking about it, usually people tend to think that if God speaks to me, it's going to be like super hard to understand. But in my understanding, it doesn't have to be like that. You can actually ask God, like, hey, what are you trying to tell me here? And he can make things more clear so we don't have to wonder. We can ask him. I think that's just awesome. So moving on to chapter 9. We see Daniel, and he is reading the book of Jeremiah, chapter 25, and he sees that God, through Jeremiah, told the people of Israel that they were going to be exiled for 70 years. Now, by this time, Daniel's old. He's getting up there. He has been in Babylon for nearly 70 years, if not more. And he's like, okay, so God, I'm kind of done with this exile thing. Like, I really want to be done with this. This is getting kind of old. So the book, or the chapter 9 of the book is literally Daniel's prayer for a good portion of it. I mean, like, except for about 6 verses, it's all Daniel's prayer, and it's a beautiful prayer. I highly recommend you reading it. And he's telling God, I am sorry for all the things that Israel has done. I apologize for all the atrocities that we have done and committed. And he's definitely accepting the blame too. He's not just saying, like, I'm sorry that my nation is so horrible, yet I haven't done these things. No. Daniel, throughout the entire thing, he's saying, like, God, I admit I am a sinner too. I admit that my country, my nation, has done horrible, horrible, horrible things. But in the book of Jeremiah, it says that it would only be 70 years. So can we be done with exile now? And while he's praying, he sees Gabriel again. And Gabriel stops him and says, wait, Daniel, you got to know something. The reason why Jeremiah said that it would be 70 years is because he was prophesying as though Israel was going to change their ways. They were going to be exiled, they were going to learn from their mistakes, and they then were going to be good. But unfortunately, Israel hasn't changed. I mean, the remnant that's still in Israel is still messing up. The people who are here are falling into becoming one with Persia and with Babylon, and they're still messing up. They're still sinning. And because they're still sinning, this exile is going to continue. And it's actually going to continue for what he called 77s, which is 490 years. And he was saying, you can't expect God to forgive people if they're not asking for forgiveness, if they're not changing. You can't expect God to do anything because they still need to be punished. They still haven't even changed the first time. So it's going to have to continue. Sorry. Which, I mean, I can understand if Daniel would have been annoyed, but I don't think that he was. I think he understood. I think that when Gabriel came and talked to him, I think he definitely was like, yeah, that makes sense. I understand. I mean, I was just listing off all the horrible things that we were doing, so I get it. And Daniel, one of the things that I love about Daniel is that he never blamed God. He never was like, God, why did you let me get taken to Babylon? He knew that it wasn't God. He knew that it was their mistakes that got him to that point. Just the exact same way that, like, when we sin and we get in trouble because we sin, we don't stand there and go, God, why did I get arrested? Because I had like 50 unpaid parking tickets and I was doing another thing that was breaking the law. Like, why did I get arrested? No! We can't blame God for our mistakes, and Daniel didn't eat it either, and I think that's just amazing. And while Gabriel is talking to Daniel and he's explaining to him, like, I'm sorry, it's gonna be like 490 years. It's gonna be a while. Sorry, Daniel. He goes on and he talks about this anointed one who's gonna come and he's going to take away the sins of the country of Israel and of Jerusalem. And obviously that's supposed to be Jesus he's talking about. And he was saying, like, the anointed one will come after the city is rebuilt. And he also explains that the anointed one will be cut off, which is a picture of what would happen when Jesus died. And he says that he even predicts, like, after Jesus dies at that point, there will be another destruction of Israel. And that's like what happened from the Roman Empire in AD 70 when Jerusalem was destroyed again. And he even discussed further, like in the far future, that there will be a 7-year period at the end of the age of the Antichrist. And during that 7 years, there will be an abomination that causes desolation in the temple, which I would imagine you guys know hasn't actually happened yet. So it's kind of really cool in that particular vision and prayer that you see, like, this is going to happen a little bit in the future, this is going to happen a little bit further on in the future, and then this is going to happen. Like, I love that about the Bible, especially the Old Testament. We see so many prophecies come true about who Jesus is and what he will do, and even further on, like what he will do when he comes back that hasn't happened yet. And this brings us to chapters 10 through 12. So, chapters 10 through 12 are Daniel's third vision. And by this point, it's the 3rd year of King Cyrus in Persia. And this vision is about turmoil, a great war. And again, we see the same progression of Persia, Greece, and then 4 kings who take over after the Greeks. And we're pretty sure that those 4 kings are the same 4 horns that we saw in Daniel's first vision. And they're depicted as the king of the north and of the south and of the east and of the west. And it's great because we read the story of, first, we see Daniel's vision. There's a very real and strong picture of a spiritual battle between an angel and the prince of Persia, or what we would call a demon. The angel was then helped in battle by Michael, and he's able to go and talk to Daniel about what he was seeing in his vision. And so my camp back in Michigan used to do this one Bible camp every year that was called Spiritual Warfare Camp. And I have always been a huge fan of preparing for battle because I fully believe that, you know, we don't battle against flesh and blood. Like it says in the Bible, we battle against the principalities of darkness, and the spiritual darkness is much stronger than the actual physical darkness that we see in this world. And I just love the fact that in Daniel, it literally has a picture of angels fighting on behalf of Daniel so that they can come and talk to him about this vision of turmoil that they're seeing. And so the angel comes and he's able to talk to Daniel. And we see a very similar wording that we do for the vision and for the dreams that Daniel's been having. And the king of Persia is doing what he wants, and no one can stop him, and he's super powerful. And then out of nowhere, we see this king from the south, which is a picture of the Greek kingdom, rise up, and it becomes even stronger, and it takes over the king of Persia. And then that king, in the midst of his strength, much like what actually happened for Alexander the Great, he's defeated, and he suddenly loses power, and 4 people take over after him, like his 4 generals did in history. And we see first off, there's a lot of fighting that happens through this section. So the South King and the North King start fighting. The first time they fight, the King of the North fails, and he loses. But later on, there are a bunch of different people who rise up and they start fighting against this King of the South. And the King of the North starts gaining more power. Well, then there are a few other kings who take over after the first King of the North. And eventually we find this King of the North that is depicted in Daniel's vision as this giant, horrible guy. And he's saying horrible things against God, and he's being haughty, and he's being like self-righteous, and he's saying he's better than God, and it's just a horrible, horrible picture. But he comes to ruin. Why? Because he's being stuck up, and he's saying that he's better than God, and God doesn't let that happen, because that's pretty much the whole point of this book, is you don't be stupid and say things like, I'm better than God. It's just not a good idea. So, chapter 12 is all about the end times. It talks about justice for those who follow God and the punishment of those who are against him. And it goes into detail. I highly recommend you read that chapter. So this brings us to the end of talking about the whole Daniel book. And so in thinking about chapters 8 through 12, and even some of the other visions that we've seen, like the vision that the dream that Daniel had that mimicked the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, we wonder, what does all this actually refer to? Because there's many different interpretations. Some people say it was that Syrian king, or the Greek king that I was talking about, the one who came and put up the statue of Zeus and killed the pig. But others say maybe it was a Roman king, and it was meaning the description of what happened in AD 70. Still others say that it's still events that are yet to come when Jesus returns, and it's like when the Antichrist is in power. But in a sense, they're all right, which is honestly how I've always felt about it, because I think that's one of the great things about the Bible, is that when it's talking about one thing, it can actually be talking about two things. And I mean, you see that especially in the like prophetic books. You can see pictures that have happened and are still yet to come. And that's what we see with Daniel. The book offers hope to all future generations, not just to those who are of Israel. And Jesus used Daniel to describe Jerusalem's leaders, which I think is really cool. When Jesus quotes about something like your book, like that must mean something. And John, he writes about Daniel to describe Rome and all future events and times and empires. And so we can see how, like, it's all, and it's all of them. It's this and it's that. It's just the whole picture. But the whole point of Daniel is that there is a pattern and there is a promise. The pattern is that human beings become beasts when they don't acknowledge who God is and God's power and the fact that God is God. When we start to try to say that we are better than God, or we know more than God, or anything along those lines, or we start to blaspheme and say that we are God, that is where we get this picture of the beast. And we have seen pictures of the beast throughout the entire book of Daniel, because they were all trying to claim, I am God, or I am better than God, or I can beat God, or I have more power than him, I am smarter than him. Whatever it was, all of those people who said that ended up in some form of being a beast. And the promise that comes with the book of Daniel is that God will one day confront the beast and rescue his world. And if you know anything about the end times, it actually talks about a beast who will be in power. And that is one of those pictures that we get from Daniel. At the end, God is going to win. He's going to beat that beast, and we don't have to worry about it. Even though, like, the descriptions that we see in the New Testament of what the end times will be like, that used to freak me out when I was a kid. Literally, it gave me chills and I wouldn't be able to sleep. It was bad. But I know that I serve a God who is stronger than them, and I don't have to worry about it. Even though the world might be afraid, I don't have to be. So, that's the book of Daniel. All right. So, one of the great things about Daniel is that it's only 12 chapters long. And I deeply and highly encourage you to read it on your own. And if you have questions, then I would be happy to talk to you guys about them. Even if it is via text, or you could call me to just, let me know. But anyways, I'm going to pray to end, and I hope you guys all have a great Sunday. So, dear Lord, I just pray for your blessings to be poured out on our youth and on our church. I pray for your protection over all of us through this scary time. And Lord, I also pray for your healing for Candy and for your protection for her husband, and that you will just take care of all those who are sick. You will help the doctors to be able to have wisdom in the whole situation. And I pray, Lord, that you will be with us today, and you will help us to remember the things that we've learned about Daniel. And through the whole thing, I pray that you will help us to remember that you are always there, you are always stronger, and you will always be the one who's going to win. And I pray this in your name. Amen.